Hello, welcome to part 5 of my Linux command line course. This video wraps up the topic of file and directory management with a detailed look at the move and copy operations. I will also revisit the concept of directories and relative path names. Here's the directory structure I will be working with in this video. It may sound strange to you, but directories, or if you prefer, folders, do not physically hold files, despite what the graphical interface may imply with the way the folder and file icons are presented to us. Directories are files themselves too. They are special files which contain lists of file names linked through numerical indexes to physical locations on the storage medium. Directory is to a file system what a table of contents or index is to a book. It allows us to organize ourselves and to find information we are interested in. Unlike regular files, which we can edit directly, for example, a text file is edited using a text editor, directory file contents are manipulated indirectly through commands such as mv, cp, rm, etc. While we describe an action as moving, copying, or removing files, what we are really doing is manipulating directories under which the files are listed. The mv command, which I will introduce in a moment, manipulates directory entries by adding file names in the destination directory while removing the same file names from the source directory. The move operation is usually very quick, even if many files, possibly large, are involved, as actual file data is not physically moved on the storage device. It is perfectly fine to say that you are moving a file into a directory, but be aware that there is more to it. I believe that technical computer users should know the inner workings of the file system, and I have a separate, more detailed video on the topic if you are interested. The link is in the video description. Alright, let's get to the move and copy commands. I will start with a simple mv command, which is short for move. This command requires at least two path names or file names as parameters. In the simplest scenario, the first parameter is a regular file, which is to be moved, while the second parameter is a destination directory. For example, here's how I would move the Apple file into the bag directory. I can use the ls or tree command to confirm the outcome of the above command. Here's the updated tree diagram, so you can visualize what happened. You can see the Apple file name now appears under the bag directory. By default, files keep their names when moved under a different directory. The destination directory, in this case the bag directory, needed to exist beforehand for the mv command to be successful if I indeed wanted the file inside that directory. I used autocomplete with tab for both path names, and this is why there is a trailing slash at the end of the bag directory name. While the trailing slash at the end of directory names is optional, it serves a very useful purpose with the mv command. It tells the command that the destination is a directory and the file needs to go in there. If the trailing slash is not there, the mv command needs to determine first whether the destination is a directory or regular file before performing the task. Without the trailing slash, if the source file is a regular file, and if the destination directory does not exist, the destination will be understood as a regular file, resulting in the source file being renamed. For example, now I will attempt to move the potato file into the bag directory, but this time I will misspell the word bag. I will still put the trailing slash in, which indicates that the misspelled bag is a directory. The command failed as the destination directory did not exist. Having the trailing slash proved to be useful in this case, as the mv command alerted me that there is a problem. What if I left the trailing slash out? Let's try it. This time the command succeeded, but since potato is a regular file and bug does not exist, the name bug was understood to be a regular file name. This resulted in the potato file being moved into the current directory and renamed to bug. This last example accidentally demonstrated how we can use the mv command to rename files. However, it was not the intended outcome here, as I wanted the potato file moved into the bag directory while keeping the original name. This mistake is fixable. I will use another mv command to move the bug file, formerly known as potato, into the bag directory, this time spelled correctly, restoring the file name in the process. Does that mean that you should use the trailing slash with the mv command if the destination is a directory? The short answer is yes, as this will help you avoid mistakes. I would also add that it is best practice to use the autocomplete tab whenever possible to minimize mistakes. I've talked about the importance and usefulness of the autocomplete tab in my previous video. It is important to verify the outcome of the mv command when finished. You can use the ls or tree command, but the mv command has a useful -v verbose option. Here's how it looks when I put the potato file back into the veggie directory with the verbose option. Notice how the command informed me that the file was renamed and not moved, which truly reveals how the mv command actually works. It is actually a rename. Perhaps ironically, there is a rename command in the Linux shell, but that command is used for pattern-based renaming of multiple files, which is not the case here. If you want to rename a single file or directory in the Linux shell, it is done using the mv command. Speaking of renaming files, quite often we rename files in place. For example, I will use the mv command to hide the banana file. Hidden files have names starting with a dot. If I want to see the hidden file using the ls or tree command, I need to use the -a option to see all files. To unhide the file, I will rename the file again, removing the dot from the beginning of the file name. Be careful when using the mv command, as it may overwrite files without any warning, causing possible data loss. For example, here I will move the banana file into bag, renaming it apple in the process. The existing apple file in bag was overwritten with the banana file, and the original apple file was lost. Assume that lost files are not recoverable if you make a mistake and overwrite files as a result of an mv command. This is why you should always keep a backup of all your files. Cautious users employ the -i interactive option with the mv command. The -i option will make the mv command prompt the user to confirm before a file is overwritten. This is similar to the -i interactive option available with the rm command, which I explained in the previous video. Here I will use the -i interactive option while moving the mango file, possibly overwriting the apple file. This time I get a warning and choose not to overwrite the existing file. Alright, so far I talked about moving regular files. How about moving directories? Directories are moved exactly the same way as regular files. However, there are a couple of things to note. 1. Directory content is moved with it. And 2. You cannot move a directory into a regular file. The destination for directory must always be a directory. As an example, here's how I would move the entire fruit directory into the bag directory. Just like with files, you can rename a directory while moving it. Here is how I would move the veggies directory into bag under the name vegetables. If you attempt to move a directory into a regular file, the mv command will not work, as you cannot change an existing file type from regular to directory. Here's an example. I will create a file called veggies. Now I will attempt to move the vegetables directory, overriding the veggies file. The move command issued an error and refused to overwrite the regular file called veggies with the vegetables directory. If I did in fact want to move the vegetables directory back where it used to be and under the old name, I would have to rename the veggies file first, so there is no name conflict. Now the mv command worked. How about overwriting directories? It turns out that the mv command will only overwrite directories that are empty. For example, I will create a directory called veggies inside the bag directory with a file called cabbage inside, making the new veggies directory non-empty. Now I will attempt to move the older veggies directory into bag, overwriting the new veggies directory in process. The mv command refused to overwrite the veggies directory inside bag, as this would cause the cabbage file to be lost. There are several routes I can take to move the veggies directory successfully into bag under these circumstances. I can rename the veggies in the bag directory before the move. I can rename the veggies directory which is being moved, or I can empty the destination veggies directory before the move. Let's say I decide option C, empty the destination directory. I want to keep the cabbage file, so it needs to be moved somewhere outside of veggies directory. Now I can overwrite the empty veggies directory inside of bag successfully. Now I also have the option to put the cabbage file back, integrating it with the veggies directory contents. You can move multiple files and/or directories at once by including multiple sources with the mv command. The mv command will treat all but last path name as a source. In case of moving multiple items, the destination must be an existing directory. This is regardless of whether you move regular files, directories, or a mix of regular files and directories. As an example, I will attempt to move the apple file and the grain directory into a directory called box. The mv command comes back with an error stating that box is not a directory, but what it should really say is that box does not exist. As I mentioned already, the mv command needs an existing destination directory to work with. I need to create the box directory first. Now the mv command will work. Here's the updated structure. Again, I use the tree command here to help you visualize what is happening, but ultimately experienced users opt for using the ls command, possibly with the -r recursive option to examine directory contents, as it may provide a more compact output than the tree command. The cp command is used to copy files, which means make duplicates. For regular files, the usage is very much like the mv command. For example, here's how I will duplicate the apple file into the bag directory. Multiple files can be copied at the same time. For example, here I will copy the rice and carrot files into bag. Copying directories requires the use of the -r recursive option. The command will refuse to work otherwise. Here's an example: copy grain directory into bag. I need to add the -r option for the operation to be successful. This will result in the grain directory being copied from the bottom up. All regular files will be copied first, and then a duplicate grain directory will be created in bag, linking to the duplicated files. The -r option must be used when mixing source directories and regular files, otherwise the cp command will only process the regular files and display an error for directories. You may recall that the mv command did not require the -r option. In fact, the mv command does not even have a recursive option. which may seem on the surface inconsistent. Remember how the mv command works. It only manipulates directory indexes, which in most cases is just a rename operation. Actual files are not moved on the storage device, although it is true that moving a file between two different storage devices involves a copy first, but the mv command handles that copy internally. The process is transparent to the user who does not need to know whether files are moved within a single storage device or across two. On the other hand, copying a directory is an involved process. You cannot just copy a directory, as the directory duplicate would link to the original files. You need to duplicate regular files inside the directory first, and that's what the recursive option handles. If details like that interest you, I have a dedicated video where I explain in depth how a Linux file system actually works. The link is in the video description. As far as overwriting existing files and directories goes, the cp command operates much like the mv command, including the risk of data loss. There is one notable difference from the mv command when copying directories onto non-empty directories with the same name. As you know already, the mv command will refuse to do that. However, the cp command will do it, merging the contents of the two directories, so be very careful. In general, the existing files in the destination directory will be kept with new entries added in. However, if the destination directory has files with same names as what is being copied, they will be replaced, causing data loss. One more reason to use the -i interactive option. For example, I will add a new file called millet in the bag/grain directory, and then copy the grain directory from box, overwriting the grain directory in bag. I will use the -i option to protect myself from possible data loss. Here I will choose to keep the rice file in the bag directory, but overwrite the wheat file. The millet file was kept as the copy directory did not have a file with such name. There are two special destination directory cases when using relative path names with the mv and cp commands, which are important to know about. The first one is when the destination directory is the present working directory. In my examples, the present working directory is food, but it is never named in a relative path. If we need to refer to the present working directory, we use the special dot symbol. Let's say I would like to move the onion file into my current directory. The destination path of such command would be only the dot. Adding a trailing slash here would be redundant, as the dot entry is always understood to be a directory. You cannot have a regular file named dot on a Linux file system. With the syntax, the moved file kept the original name. If you want to change the file name during the move, replace the dot with the desired file name. For example, now I will move one of the rice files into my current directory, but rename the file in the process to wild rice. I did not use the / prefix with the destination path name as it would be redundant. There are only a handful of special cases where the / prefix would be used, but I will talk about it in a later video. The second special case is when the destination directory is the parent. Just like the current directory, the parent directory is never named in relative path names either. If needed, we use the special .. symbol instead of parent's name. For example, now I will go into the grain directory and copy the wheat file into the parent directory, which is box. The source is just a wheat file name, while the destination is the parent directory represented by .. Here's the outcome. Just like the dot is a special system entry, which is always a directory. You cannot have a regular file name .. on a Linux file system, so placing a trailing slash after it would be redundant. The copied file kept its name here as expected. To change the name during the operation, add the desired name after the .. prefix in the destination path. For example, now I will copy the rice file into the parent directory, renaming it to wild rice at the same time. That is all for this lesson. Go ahead to the next part where I explain file naming rules and file name wildcards. If you like this video, give it thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching.